Coalesce is an open source framework that is super flexible and allows you to really quickly develop full stack web applications. So if we click over here on Introduction, you can see the tech stack that it's built on is .NET, EF, Vue, TypeScript, and Vite. And basically what it does for you is it generates all of the API layers, kind of the mundane bits of your app development process. So to get started with making a Coalesce app, it's super simple. Head over to Getting Started and go ahead and pop open a terminal here. So we're going to just run these commands. Great, so let's go ahead and open that up. So head over to your solution file and open that up in Visual Studio. So you can see here under source, we have two projects. We've got a data project and a web project. And under our web project, it looks like kind of your typical Vue project here. So you have your views and your components and all that. And then under your data project, it looks like your typical EF project. So you've got one model, a widget, your AppDB context. So let's go ahead and generate our data model. So pop back open the command line and head over to your data project and do .NET EF migrations add and make sure that your web project is set as your startup project. Okay, start. Okay, so here we have a Coalesce app. So you can see that we have a couple of example pages. So we have a custom example page, our home page, just with some general information. And then we have the admin pages, and these are generated for you by Coalesce. So we can see our widget here. So if we click this, it'll bring us to an admin page, basically just a CRUD page where you can create a new widget. And we don't need to give it a date. This actually auto saves for you. So if I hit the reload here, it'll be saved. If I hit the back button, we'll see it pop up here. So let's go ahead and see how we can add our own models. So let's head back to our Visual Studio, and in our data project under models, we're going to add a new file. So let's go ahead and add in a new book model, and we'll add in an author model. So on our author, we're going to make this public, and we're going to add an ID. And let's switch to our book. And then we're going to add on the author just a let's see, navigation property of books, just to make it easier for querying. Okay, and head over to your AppDB context, add your two DB sets. Great, and then we're going to add a migration. Okay, and then the last thing to do is switch over to your web project. Adding a migration and running Coalesce don't have to happen in any particular order. So over here, just do .NET Coalesce. So let's go ahead and hit play. So head over to admin pages, and there we go, author and book. So let's head over to author. I think we need an author before we need a book. Let's add a new author, and now that's auto-saved. We can go add a book for this author. So let's go add another author. Let's go give this guy some books. So we've got, oh, and you can see there's filters here. Because we navigated to this admin table for book through that particular author, it's kind of auto-filtering for us. Oops, there we go. Let's take a look at how we can load up this information, authors and books, on our home page here. So let's open up our terminal again. From here, let's type code dot, and this will pop VS Code for you. And let's go ahead and kind of split screen this. So in here, we can head over to our views, head to home, and let's get rid of all this. That will make this page blank. There we go. And while we're at it, let's look at the network tab, just so we can kind of see what's going on when I start doing stuff. Okay, so on here, the first thing we want to do is load up all of our authors. So to do that with Coalesce, it's super easy. All you have to do is create a new instance of the author list view model, which is just a generated TypeScript class for you. Const authors equals new author list view model. So there's a list view model and there's a normal view model. So the list view model loads up a list, normal view model, you give it a particular author ID and it will load up that author. And then all we have to do here is call authors.load. And if we save this, nothing will happen on screen, but we will see it pop up in our network tab. There we go, list, and you can see we're getting some stuff back. If we put the headers, you can see this is hitting an API endpoint generated by Coalesce. We've got some paging going on. By default, your page size is 10. We're going to leave it as 10. I'll kind of show you how to do paging. And let's look at preview. So we have author 1 with, let's see, with 2 books, and author 2 with 1 book. So let's display that information here. This is not going to be a UI tutorial, so this is going to be kind of ugly. Save that. So there's our 2 authors. We can see both of our authors have a book list on them. So let's also display that. And if I save that, there's book 1, book 2, Coalesce for Dummies, no description for this one because we didn't write one. So that is how easy it is to load up data. So let's talk about paging next. To do paging, we first have to have a little bit more data. Okay, so here's a little bit more data for us to play with. You can see that this is not returning all of our authors, again, because we have that limited page size of 10. So we're only getting 10 back. There's a couple ways that you can get more data back. The first way is obviously to increase the page size, which we can do like this. Save. Okay, they're all coming back. This obviously isn't the best approach if you have lots of data. A good approach would be to use pagination, and Coalesce makes it super easy to do pagination. So Coalesce has a bunch of pre-built components that you can use. One of them is for pagination, and it's called the C-list pagination, and you just pass it your list that you want to do that on, and if you hit save, you'll notice that the component that you see actually on the admin pages pops up. So you have the ability to see what page you're on, see how many items there are in the total list, change your page size to whatever you want, and it will default to what I had over here. So now it goes back to 10, and you can switch between the 2 pages. Now you can see this isn't actually working, so another thing you have to do is you have to set up auto load for your list. That way when you change these things, it automatically reloads your list. You have to call both load and auto load. So if you save that, and we change our page size, you should see our other 2 authors pop up. There they are. If we change it back to 10, then we can go to the next page, and you can add some nice loading and stuff so it's not so jumpy and not a bad UI, but this is where we're going to leave it. So the next thing I want to talk about is how you can filter data on your backend. So for example, maybe we don't want to show any authors that don't have any books. Well, let's see. 4 of these authors, 2, 3, 4. We don't want to show 4 of these authors because they don't have any books. We only want to list authors that have published books here. Let's take a look at how we can do that. So we're going to talk about data sources. And all a data source is any data that's retrieved from your database through the generated controllers, the ones generated by Coalesce, is done so through a data source. So these data sources control what gets loaded and how it gets loaded. And by default, there's always going to be a single generic data source that you can then override if you wanted to implement something custom. So to start making your own data source, head back over to Visual Studio, and let's look at making a data source for our author. So head over to your author. I'm going to close this. And to do so, come down here, make a new class. You can call it, the name that you call it doesn't matter too much. I like to tack on data source, that way I know what it is. we're just going to say author data source, standard data source is the class you want to derive from. And let's make a constructor. So then there's a couple of things that you can override on a data source. For this, we're just going to override the get query, which is the thing that retrieves the data. But if you type in override, and then you can see it's got a bunch of stuff that you could override. Okay, there it is. All we're going to do is we're just going to say filter where any of the books, any authors that have books. So if they don't have a book, I don't want to return them in my query. Okay, and then head over here, .NET Coalesce. So make sure you generate your Coalesce code. Okay, and now we're going to stop our app. Go ahead and run again. Okay, so here we are back on our front end. And you can see we're still getting back authors that don't have books. And the reason for this is on our back end here. This is not our default data source. So there's a specific attribute that you can add, default data source. And that this will then say, by default, this is the data source that you should always go through. Oh, let's stop this. There we go. So now if I mark that as my default data source, you will see that no authors coming back that don't have books, but if we go to our admin page and we go to author, we only get 8 of them back. So I think on our admin pages, we do want to see the authors that don't have books, but on our home page, like if this was like a storefront page, for example, we'd only want to show authors that don't have books. And the admin pages will always use your default data source. So we're going to remove this, and I'll show you how to specify what data source you want to use if it's not the default one. So here, we're going to say, right before we do load, authors dot data source equals new author, and we will load this from our model, which I don't see as a default option here, so let's just type it in. Sometimes IntelliSense works, sometimes it doesn't. New author dot data sources dot author data source. There we go. There's our data source. You can see I haven't saved yet, so it hasn't refreshed this page, but we can see we have the authors coming back without books. As soon as I save, they should not come back anymore. So save, and there we go. We're only getting 8 back. So that is how you can use a data source. That was just a very basic example of how you can use it. So let's take a look at, on our admin pages, when we create, when we create a new book, there's this publish date. And let's figure out how we can default that publish date to today's date if it's not specified. That way it's always set whenever making a new book. So let's go ahead, head back to Visual Studio, can stop our app, and head over to book. So there's something called data sources that we just went over, and now we're going to go over something called behaviors. So behaviors are they control kind of the save, the create, the delete endpoints, whereas the data sources control the get endpoints, right? That's how you can think of it. Now, with data sources, you can have as many data sources as you'd like. With the behavior, there's only one behavior. You can only implement it once. So if you have a save behavior, you only specify that once. If you have a delete behavior, you only specify that once. So let's go ahead, come down here, public, class, book, behaviors, and because we only specify it once, I typically name my behaviors, the class name followed by behaviors. And then standard behaviors, just like standard data source. And now, again, there's a couple of things you can override here. We're going to override before save in particular because I want to set data before it's committed to the database. So before save right here. So before we return, I'm going to say if save kind dot create equals kind. So if we're creating a new book, which is defined by this save kind here, it's enum, which is just create or update. So we're either creating or updating the book. And item. So item is the book coming in. If you're doing a create, old item won't be populated, but item will be. If you're doing an update, they should both be populated. So item dot publish date is null. So if we're creating a new book and the publish date has not been specified, we're gonna set the publish date to right now. Another thing we can do, I'll show you kind of with the update. So if save kind is an update, and the old item author ID is not equal item author ID, then return cannot update the author of a book. So what we're doing here is if you've already created the book and then you go back and you try to change the author of the book, it's going to throw an error saying you cannot change the author of a book once you've created it, which makes sense. You probably aren't changing authors of a book after you create it. And all we're doing there is we're just checking it's an update, and then if the old item, the state before you made any changes, if its author ID is different than the new item, the state after you made changes, then we're going to throw that error. So let's go ahead, save this. You don't actually have to generate any Coalesce code for this because, again, you only can implement one behavior, so there's no reason to generate, there's nothing new to generate here. So go ahead and hit play. And if we go, we'll look at the inspect tab too, which is kind of nice to see what's happening. The network tab, go to admin pages, go to book, create a new book. So we'll say title is new book. And as soon as we pick an author, it's going to autosave. So I'll clear this, you'll see an autosave pop up. It's going to autosave and it should automatically fill in this published date. So let's pick some author. Okay, there we go. So there's our save. You can see published date was automatically populated. And now if we try and change the author to somebody else, we'll get an error. Yeah, can't update the author of a book. So there's our error. You get a 400 bad request. So that's a really simple way to add some custom logic to saving things. You can do this with delete as well. The last thing to look at is, you've probably noticed every time I click this admin page, there's this Coalesce security overview. And if we head to this page, this is a Coalesce generated page, and it tells you who was allowed to read, create, edit, delete all of your model endpoints. So we can actually go ahead and add security attributes to our models to lock this down. So let's go back to Visual Studio, and if we take a look at our book, we can specify edit, we can specify security permission levels, and we can say allow all. So you can see there's a couple options here, there's 3. So there's deny all, and allow authorized. So allow authorized is the default setting. So by default, anybody signed into your app is able to do whatever, right? Allow all means that you're allowing anonymous users, people not authenticated or signed in, to edit a book, which is probably not what you want, but we're going to do it for demo purposes. And let's say delete, let's say that we don't want anybody ever deleting a book. So security permission levels, deny all, so nobody's allowed to delete a book. Let's save that. You can do this as well. So like, for example, if you did create, if you had roles in here, you could do this with roles. So like I could say like admin. I don't have any roles set up, but that's what that would look like. And additionally, if you had roles, you could say only admin is allowed to edit the author ID, right? And I don't have any roles, that's why it's so hard to type this in. So you could do something like this, but we're not going to do that. Go ahead, head back here, .NET, Coalesce, and let's go ahead and hit play. Okay, and now if we head over to the admin pages, we go to overview, you can see on our book, we've said anybody's allowed to read it, because we said anybody's allowed to edit it. So if you're able to edit it, you're probably able to read it, right? and then we said anybody logged in can create a book, because that's just the default. We haven't specified that, but that's just the default setting there. And then nobody's allowed to delete a book. That is a quick overview of Coalesce. And before we go, I'll show you kind of an example of a more high-level implementation of a web app that you can make using Coalesce. This here is just a higher-level example of an app made with Coalesce. This is still a demo app. This isn't really like a real app that I've spent a bunch of time making. This probably took me, not counting the majority of my time spent trying to figure out what I wanted to make and how I wanted things to look, which they still don't look very good, but that's okay. But the actual coding of this probably took me just under a couple of hours. You can make pretty advanced web applications with Coalesce very quickly. So this looks very similar to our other project that we just made, except I've added in a test file here. I've hooked up authentication, so you do have to log in. Okay, so again, fairly basic app overall, but obviously much more high level than what we just made. So we still have our admin pages, and you can see I've got a bunch of models in here. I'm not actually using all of the models. And you have an account, so log in, you can actually switch. I've got switching themes. This is just a Vuetify thing. Sign out, because again, we have an account to log into. We have some CRUD operations, you can create new stuff. And you can do some very basic page navigation. A graph. That this does work, it's just I don't have any data on here. Here, if we go to one I've put some random data on, you can see there's a graph here. But all the data is being loaded and saved and managed with Coalesce. I think that if I were to do another video, it would probably be a bit more of a series on how to build an app like this, probably this app in particular, from start to finish, and going over testing and entity framework, and then some Vue and TypeScript, so kind of a full stack tutorial. So that's it for this video, and until next time.